Good evening. Thank you for tuning in to Face to Face. I'm your host, Dennis Ward. Our guest this week is Christian Sinclair, the Chief of Opaskwayak Cree Nation in northern Manitoba. Chief Sinclair, after graduating, went on to serve the Canadian military from 1988 to 1995, taking part in tours of duty in Cyprus and serving with the Special Forces in Somalia. Chief Sinclair is also currently a director for National Access Cannabis. And Chief Sinclair, appreciate you taking some time here with us. Of course, you've made a number of headlines over the role that Opaskwayak Cree Nation is playing in the cannabis sector, industry. I'm just wondering if you could take us through how the community first got involved.
Good evening, Dennis. Absolutely. When the federal government had announced that they were going to legalize cannabis, they announced it at a national level and an international level at the United States, and they made it clear that Indigenous people would be part of this new economy. So for us, when we saw it as a Opaskwayak Cree Nation, being a newly elected leader, and our community was near third party and our corporation was near bankruptcy, we said we've got to make some very fast moves here, get our ducks in order, clean up our act, and at the same time see what this opportunity is and what it could present for Opaskwayak Cree Nation. So we originally engaged our Opaskwayak Business Development Corporation to go out there and learn what it was about. We attended some conferences here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and it was there that we discovered very early on that the opportunity was going to line the retail sector as opposed to the LPs or the licensed producer side, which are the growers, because of all the risks associated with it, with potential mold, heavy metals, pesticides, etc. And if that was to happen, you have to wipe out your crop and regrow it and get the green light after 6 months to get back into business. So for us, it was very high risk based on the risk assessment we conducted. So we looked at the other area, and when we asked a question to some presenters, where's the most lucrative part of the supply chain going to be? And they said in the near future, it's going to be in retail. Keeping in mind it was illegal still in Canada, and that looking at the activity that was happening in the United States, we saw what the potential could be. So we started honing in our focus on that area, learning about it and what that meant. So as we started to pursue that, we also met some people along the way, and one of them was instrumental in the lobby of legalizing cannabis in Canada. By chance, we came across this company presenting here in Winnipeg, seeking out First Nations that had urban reserves. And for Opaskwayak Cree Nation being 620 kilometers north of Winnipeg, that was a non-starter for them and for us. So in the discussion, we changed the dialogue around and said, instead of becoming a rung on your ladder and being a host where it would have not been too beneficial for us being way up north, was how do we become an owner of the corporate ladder? The gentleman responded back saying, well, it's going to cost you some money. I said, well, how much? Keeping in mind we were near bankruptcy and near third party. And he says, well, how much do you need? I said, well, we'll figure that out when we get there. So let us know and we'll start from there. So with that particular discussion, I had asked them to become owners that we would bring strategic value as well, not only within our community, but in other First Nations across Canada, and with the lobbying effort provincially and federally. So they took it back to their board, and in that discussion with them, they had never encountered First Nations before, and figuring out how do we work with First Nations and in this new commodity that's going to be legalized. So with that discussion, they did agree to meet with us, and we met here in Winnipeg a week later, so things moved very quickly. We had our meeting, and because they were going public into an initial public offering of $6 million, they had already sold out all those shares. So what they had to do was convince their board members to sell some of it back to the company in order to bring us in as a strategic partner. They did, and lo and behold, we came in at $3 million. It wasn't until after we started negotiating that it made us the largest private shareholder of the company prior to going public, which is the first deal of its kind in Canada. So that was the first part of it, which was actually the easy part. The trickier part was taking it to our community. And when we had presented the opportunity to our council table, our Anashigawak, we call them in Cree, and our Katayak, our elders, it was very interesting because every single one of them shared a personal story of someone in their family using it for medicinal purposes. Not once was it called a drug or an illegal substance. It was referred to as muskegee in our conversation. So when we went to go make the motion to approve to pursue this avenue, it was passed unanimously and endorsed by the Council of Elders at our table. From there, we then took it to the community, and recognizing the fact that it was still illegal at the time, and that was a lot of stigma that came with it, with the crime, with the negative impacts of social society. How are we going to counter this? The response to that was, it's been in our community for many generations. The reality is it's the black market that has been prospering off of it with no benefit to the community or to the governments. So with the fact that it was going legal, turned the tables where it would allow for employment, business opportunities, and a social benefit to the community by way of, in our case, we now have 16 employees in Opaskwayak Cree Nation. We have revenue being paid under a long-term lease through the retail footprint, and that we have new opportunities coming not only with that operation, but provincially and nationally. So it's opened up a whole new avenue of opportunity for Opaskwayak Cree Nation.
You've mentioned the $3 million, but there was also a line of credit to National Access Cannabis. What has that meant?
Yeah, well, what happened was as we started lobbying effectively as Opaskwayak to our provincial government of Manitoba, we were successful in them having a component in there of 10% for Indigenous inclusion, which was the only province of its kind or territory in Canada to allow that piece in there. So, we thank the province of Manitoba for incorporating that piece in there, which really was a step towards economic reconciliation. And fortunately for us, we were one of 4 master licensees that won one of those licenses out of over 120 submissions from across Canada and the U.S. So we were very fortunate to be able to do that. So as we pursued that, it allowed us to open up to 16 retail locations in Manitoba, which we're in the midst of building right now. So we started pursuing other calls for RFPs across Western Canada, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC. And in Alberta, we've won 37 locations. We made a strategic move in buying a company called New Leaf, plus the licenses under National Access Cannabis, now known as Meta, our retail footprint. So we'll have 37 locations in Alberta, 16 in Manitoba. We're pursuing potentially 800% owned in BC. And then some strategic partnerships with other individuals and communities in British Columbia, and then Saskatchewan. We're looking at some options to strategically acquire some. So with that, we won more licenses than we expected, which meant a cash injection requirement by the company. And because we were so successful so quickly, Opaskwayak Cree Nation, through some strategic maneuvering, we became certified under what's known as a First Nations Financial Authority, FNFA, which allows First Nations that qualify based on best practices, administrative policies, and procedures to borrow against own source revenue up to 25 years. So going from a situation of near bankruptcy and third party to building a war chest based on our own source revenue of roughly $7 million a year, extrapolating that to $56 million. That then allowed us to be able to borrow from that and make these strategic investments. So the $3 million we invested has already paid itself back already. When we won these other licenses to build out, they required $35 million. So to avoid dilution and selling shares on the Toronto Stock Exchange, we strategically made that investment with some interest and loan fees, of course. And we got that back and more in 3.5 months. So we invested $35 million to allow for these build-outs to happen across Canada.
So the community's getting back about $7 million a year, is that?
Well, right now, if you look at our share value just on the stock exchange and the fact that we've paid off our original investment of $3 million, we're already $7 million plus right now, and that's on the low end of the share value right now. We expect that to grow and expand significantly as we build out more retail outlets across Canada. And just recently, we invested another $9 million through a strategic move as we position for expansion into Ontario. And then another $3.6 million that we invested. So we've been using our money very methodically, very strategically to avoid dilution and value of our shares, which is expanding our value and our share value within the TSX.
So how much would you say Opaskwayak Cree Nation has in terms of dollar figures in this game right now?
Right now, well, if we were to add up everything, it's $35 million plus $9 million plus $3 million. We've got the $35 million back plus a nice healthy return on that, and now just recently we've invested $12.6 million that will be recovering within 6 months. So again, we'll get the initial principal back plus interest fees and loan fees and warrants and options for future purchasing of shares. So it's a whole new way of doing business for Opaskwayak, and it's allowed us to expand our ability to operate on a national and international level.
It's big money, and I'll ask you what it means for those in the community, but we're just got to step aside for a quick break here, and then we'll continue our conversation with Chief Christian Sinclair here on Face to Face. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Chief Christian Sinclair from the Opaskwayak Cree Nation. And before the break, we were talking about some of the dollar figures here, and just adding it up, it was about $47 million that Opaskwayak Cree Nation currently has in the cannabis industry. What do you think that means for those of the community?
Well, what it means is us to be able to strategically put our monies to work through our own source revenues long term. And the beauty of this industry is that we've been able to recover a lot of that original investment back already. And the irony of this is using a commodity that's been illegal since 1920, just legalized October 17th, and it's allowed us to be able to create employment for 16 people in the community. We're actually hiring over 750 employees across Western Canada right now. And with the rollout in Ontario, when that opens up, we're hoping that we'll secure a large number of retail outlets there that will allow us to hire an additional 1,250 employees. So with the monies that we're generating, it's going to be used to reinvest back in the community based on what the community wants through our comprehensive community plan. You know, if they want expansion with educational dollars, scholarships, enhancement of educational funds, infrastructure for housing, sewer and water, buildings, health centers, the reconciliation and investment in our language through our language programs from K to 12, and any other needs that the community wishes and wants, that we'll strategically be able to pull and sell out shares as needed to invest in those new areas aside from our government funds and our own source revenues.
We're looking at some visuals from Meta and you know, the long lineups and everything. We'd spoken with you in the past on In Focus, and you said you wanted to be the Tim Hortons of pot. Is that basically what's happening here with Meta?
Absolutely. As of today, we are the largest cannabis retail operator in Canada and growing. So we'll be by far the largest retail operator. So we are moving towards achieving that goal and objective.
You know, like I said, we were seeing long lineups there. It's a couple of months into it now. Is the demand still out there?
It's actually, there's a huge demand, and the challenge that we've run into is that the supply across Canada from the licensed producers can't keep up. So we're actually having to turn away employees until we get the next shipment of inventory every few days. But we expect that to be resolved within the next 5 months. So come May, June of 2019, we should pass that curve and be able to stock fully all of our shelves. And it's not just the flower, there's a demand by the baby boomer generation of oils, CBD oils for health purposes. And this is something our elders has always said was the muskegee, or the medicinal benefits that come with that plant. And that's what's really playing out right now across Canada. And we're seeing it firsthand in our community.
There was a big media story that referred to you as the kingpin of the pot industry. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, this was a story by W5. The reporting crew came in from Toronto, and that was a term that they used. Personally, I think it had a negative connotation with the drug trade prior to it becoming legal, and said, could you put a positive spin on it? And they turned it to Titan. So, you know, for me, it's all about just getting the business done and doing what's right for the community of the Opaskwayak Cree Nation at large.
Of course, when we're talking about making big dollars and First Nations making big dollars, there's others looking to get some of those dollars back, and that would be perhaps the Manitoba government and the Pallister government saying it's going to enforce a cannabis retail tax on First Nations in 2019 this year. Is there a plan to fight this?
Well, we had met as a number of First Nations that are hosting retail footprints in Manitoba. Originally, the province of Manitoba came out calling it a tax, then it turned into a levy, and now it's a social responsibility fee. We have no problem with a social responsibility fee, but what we want is the ability to administer those dollars ourselves, that we can then invest and adjust those social needs within our community and the surrounding area. So it's a matter of sitting down and negotiating a situation that's a win-win, rather than the province having to impose its will on First Nations. We can administer and manage our affairs better than anybody. And we know what the challenges and issues are, so we'll know where to hone in and invest those dollars to adjust those issues.
There's talk that this would, that urban reserves and facilities on reserve wouldn't be exempt from this. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes, that's correct with the province's position right now, but everything is negotiable. It's no different than the tobacco tax rebate or the gas rebate. We would expect cannabis to be treated no differently, and we hope that will be the case when we sit down with the provincial government.
It's early days in the legalization, but 6% of annual sales, what would we be talking about here?
Well, in our case, with the numbers that we've projected, it's going to be a healthy number, and keeping in mind that the federal government agreed to provide 75% of federal tax to the jurisdictions. So Manitoba will be getting 75% of that GST, 25% stays with the federal government, and then they're incorporating this social responsibility fee as well. So it's a matter of how much taxes or social responsibility fees do you impose before we become uncompetitive to the black market. And that's a reality that really has to be looked at and reviewed, but at the same time making an opportunity to benefit First Nations that are operating these retail outlets as well as the province. There's room for win-win for everybody.
Do you think the industry currently right now is competing with the black market?
Yes, it is, and I think that's one of the ironies right now is the black market is filling that void of the shortage across Canada right now. There's those that still have their back alley suppliers, if you will, but as much as we can get the LPs across Canada to provide us with the inventory that we need, we'll be able to really put a dent in that come May or June of 2019.
We were talking before, and I thought Meta had about 9 stores, but you're way bigger than that with room for expansion. How many stores are out there, and how much room is there for expansion?
Yeah, we have 20 fully operational right now across Western Canada. We're opening up 2 more in the next 7 days. Our goal is to have over 50 in Western Canada, and then we'll be pursuing at least 75 in Ontario, providing what the jurisdictional rules and regulations are. So we're already by far the largest retail footprint in Canada.
And as we mentioned, the 2 biggest markets, I guess, Ontario and BC, really don't have any bricks and mortar stores yet. What's the limit here, do you think? Well,
in BC, they're saying that there'll be up to 8 100% retail outlets owned by a company. Anything above and beyond that, they have to be below 10%. In the case of Ontario, they're going through a lottery scheme right now, which makes it a bit tricky for us to be able to make strategic investments. So we're hoping that will change come January 2019. But what these opportunities allow us to do now, and we also have a online presence in the province of Manitoba, that basically allows us to sell anywhere across Canada for those that want to pursue our website, which is Meta. With some of the monies we've reinvested into a company called Tricom, which is basically a specialty finance company geared towards those companies or businesses that can't get funding through their traditional avenues such as the banks and whatnot. So we're going to become a specialty finance lender that will focus on companies that want to start, craft growers, LPs, accessories, you name it. So it would be, if you will, for people to understand, it would be like the lender of choice on an international basis, minus the U.S., where it's illegal federally at this point. And then we just made another investment this past week into a company called Alternate Health, which is going to be a major player in the U.S. So we're very anxious to see how that's going to roll out as we roll that out in January of 2019.
Definitely another huge untapped market there.
Absolutely.
When we're talking about these millions of dollars and what you hope the community sees in the end, are there things on the ground now that people in Opaskwayak can point to and say, that we have that because of these investments that we've made?
Not as of yet, only because we had only opened on October 17th. But with some of the strategic loans that we made, we've used that to tackle our deficit, which was pretty significant, and it's now put us in a very strong, healthy financial position. So come the new fiscal year of 2019, we're going through our budgets and our review of our comprehensive community plan to see what will be the priority. And of course, in any First Nation, it's housing and infrastructure.
Right.
So that's where we'll hone in and focus some of our investment coming up in this fiscal year.
Chief, we're going to step aside for another quick break, and then we'll continue our conversation with Chief Christian Sinclair here on Face to Face. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Opaskwayak Cree Nation Chief Christian Sinclair from Northern Manitoba. And Chief, has there been any criticism from community members or others to this ambitious plan that the community has undertaken?
No, initially there was because of the stigma, but I think just in the last month and a half now that they're seeing the retail operation in full operation, operates just like any other storefront in the Otunike Mall. People have become normalized with that, and we get a lot of visitors from surrounding communities coming into shop, so there's some spin-offs to our other storefronts in the community as well. So that's something we didn't expect, but it's actually provided a nice spin-off.
Yeah, it's funny when you look back on all those stories of the horror stories that were going to happen when if this were ever to become legalized. Do you feel that what you've done here, these investments, is a model for other First Nations out there?
Well, for Opaskwayak, it's working very well. It's allowed us to evolve into a whole new way of doing business within the Toronto Stock Exchange with publicly traded companies. It's introduced us to new partners, and what we're cognizant of all times is to ensure that whoever we partner with shares our values, know who we are as an Inuit or Crees from Opaskwayak Cree Nation, and that as we move forward, we can share those values, and we're learning from them how to do that level of business, and they're learning about us and who we are. So it is economic reconciliation happening with this new commodity as well.
Of course, we're seeing a number of First Nations here in Manitoba, Treaty 1 specifically as well, benefiting from this industry, and some places in Montreal. Is it too late for some First Nations who are seeing what's happening to get involved?
No, I've been approached by a number of First Nations across Canada, and we're only just scratching the surface. People talk about the LP side and the retail side. But in reality, this is going to be a global expansion. More countries are starting to see that it's working in Canada, so they want a part of it. So Canada is going to be a leader in many ways. And when you think about it, with Opaskwayak being the largest private shareholder of NAC, which is one of the largest retail footprints in Canada and the world, we actually technically are one of the largest retail operators in the world at this point, the way it is right now.
Chief, I understand you're probably not planning to run for re-election. Is that, are you planning to take a bigger role in the cannabis industry?
No, with me, I was told by my kookum, my grandmother years ago, when you go out to the world, and I was gone 30 years, was that you're going to learn things, bring the good stuff back, and you'll help your community one day. And this is one way of helping my community. We've been able to turn the ship right around very quickly in 18 months. I think 20 years of getting us to that point and turning it around allows us now to say, where does the community go from here? There's a lot of strong leaders in Opaskwayak Cree Nation. It comes down to creating a plan that's the people's plan, not the leaders of the day, but what the people want. We give that directive to our management, and we've strategically separated our business from politics and our administration from politics. So they implement and do the policy designed by what the people want. And we just provide the lobbying support and political support to move our agenda forward to improve our quality of life for our First Nation. But in regards to the future, that remains to be seen. I always say that's in the Creator's hands, and we'll see where that goes in the future.
Well, Chief Sinclair, it's been a pleasure to have you here, and some interesting stuff, and appreciate you joining us here.
Thank you, Dennis.
That is all the time we have for today and for this season of Face to Face. Thanks to all our guests this season, and to those behind the scenes who get the show to air each and every week. Special thanks to our multi-talented editor and shooter, Wilfred Moore. We're always looking for new guests, so if you have any suggestions, please email us at news@aptn.ca. This show and past episodes are available as podcasts. You can find those at aptn.ca/face-to-face. Thanks for tuning in to Face to Face. I'm Dennis Ward.